this ordinance that was very much driven by the Midtown group with a lot of racism and transphobia in it, pushed through the APD in the city of Atlanta, proposed this banishment ordinance. We stacked the rooms, filled the halls, flooded folks with faxes and phone calls and emails, and we stopped that ordinance from passing. We got it out of... But what was even better was that instead of just tossing it out the window, which was good, they said, okay, the mayor's office said, thanks for all your work. We see that there's a lot of energy around this. We understand that this is a crisis, the way that police right now are treating street-level sex workers. We're going to form a working group. They called it initially the Working Group on Prostitution, and then they changed it to the Working Group to End Prostitution. Which, you know, was a great thing in that they're willing to scrap the ordinance that's currently on the books. So we got alerted to the situation because they were proposing something even worse. But what's on the books sucks. So that's my legal analysis. So, you know, we really felt like this is an opportunity for us all as a community, as folks who are impacted, to get in the fight and really lay out for the city of Atlanta a much better solution than what they had come up with. So there have been, like Ms. said, 3 meetings of the working group. For those, raise your hand if you've been to one. Okay, so just shout out a word to describe them. Bureaucratic. Okay, so they haven't been, and we sort of don't assume that they're going to be. Places where they either really value community inputs, or where they're really deeply committed to doing something, frankly. It does not feel that way. But you know what? Our job as organizers, as community members, is to demand that they do it. So we're not waiting for them to take up the mantle. That's why we're here. And we're also not waiting for them to come up with a better proposal, because frankly, they're the ones who came up with the crap in the first place. And so we said we need to go to our folks, and so we've been in community meetings since March, gathering input, ideas, hearing from folks who work the streets of Atlanta, who are working, who worked in the past, about what would be helpful, right? Instead of being harassed by cops, hauled into jail, and given fines. What would actually help folks if they chose to get off the streets for good and have a different way of making a living. So that is what has informed the people's proposal. I really like the help of Microsoft Word, which gives you templates to make things look fancy, which is why it looks more than just words on a page. But this is what we're looking at, and I want to make sure I say something just to start with too, that there's a whole range, and I think even in this room, and folks have testified, we've got lots of people here. Does anyone actually here have in the room? Okay, I'll go through this, and then we can do that. A range of options, right? Like somehow, when we went into the first working group meeting, some of us were thinking, if over here you have some form of legalization or decriminalization, and those are different things, and there's a lot of, but basically taking the idea that it's a crime that people are engaged, because it's consensual sex or it's survival sex, right? The idea of treating that as a crime, on the one hand, is over here. On the other hand is crack down on everybody you see, on the buyers, the sellers, as they call them, right? And what a lot of us in the SNAP Coalition, what BT put forward about our guiding principles is that we do not believe that incarceration, that jail time, or the use of the criminal justice system is an appropriate response to this issue. That's fundamental. At the same time, we realize the city of Atlanta might not quite be ready for the whole decriminalization, legalization thing right now. And so what we try to do is find a proposal that is a stepping stone. It moves us in that direction. It moves us away from criminal justice and into all the things that we need in our communities anyway to make our lives better and to have our families thrive. So that is where we're headed with this. We recognize it is not everything we want, it is a stepping stone. So the basics. Pre-booking diversion program for the city of Atlanta is what we're proposing. So I'm trying to think of the easiest way to do this. I think I'll set this part and then maybe we can read the principles just going around the room. So pre-booking diversion program identifies whatever low-level folks engage, in which the cop says, oh, I have probable cause, right, to make an arrest. And instead of, and sometimes does make the arrest, but instead of booking, driving them to jail, doing all of the stuff that it would take to book, to get them in front of a judge and do all of that, instead of that, they get diverted straight into services. So the idea would be that they would actually get driven probably physically or guided to a place where there is case manager. And they would be assigned a case manager at the instance that they said, I would prefer to go into services than into jail. So the person who could be arrested says, I would rather go into services, they get brought to a case manager. That case manager works with them on a whole variety. People have really different needs. So it's not an issue of everybody should get the same, program. Some people might need job training. Some people need housing. Some people need to get out of domestic violence situations. Some people need mental health, some people need addiction treatment. The idea is a case manager would be able to network with those services and provide that for the person. I don't even need to read you guys the justifications that the city needs, because we don't need that. But I think it's important to know the way that we've seen these programs work in the past is it's not automatic, because you're also not mandating someone into the service, right? It's a choice on the person's part. It's a messed up choice, because the other choice often looks like jail. So we're not trying to pretend that that's a real choice, but for a lot of people that we've spoken to and folks in the community, in the room, have said, mandating someone into services and making it automatic is not the way to go. The one thing I do want to bring up from the justification stuff is just that from the APD's own stats that they brought up in the working group, 91% of the arrests that they make for solicitation for this offense are sellers, right? So they go on a whole thing about how they treat everybody the same, prostitutes and johns, right? 91% of the close to 1,000 arrests they make every year, right? So you know who's getting arrested. It is the most vulnerable, the folks who have the least money to pay the fines, etc. So key principles. These are the principles we're laying out that we think are important for an effective people conversion program. And this is when we split into small groups that we want you to pick back up. But why don't we just start, Troy, here and wind our way back, just reading each principle out loud.
Group collaboration and shared dissatisfaction with the status quo is necessary but not sufficient. The shared sense of dissatisfaction must turn into collaborative work.
Training and policies. High quality training as well as clear policies and diversion protocols for law enforcement officers are critical. Pre-booking diversion requires law enforcement officers to give high value to helping people they have traditionally been trained to see only as criminals.
Access. Immediate access to needed services for program participants rather than referral to a waiting list is important.
Adequate funding. This is helped by a commitment to capturing and reinvesting justice savings to sustain the pre-booking diversion program.
Service dedicated funding. At least half of program funding should be dedicated to direct services for program participants rather than program administration.
Commitment to harm reduction. Adopting a harm reduction orientation allows the program to design for and measure the incremental successes individuals need to move into a new life.
Peer outreach. Former sex workers serve as guides, coaches, and/or advocates to connect individuals with housing, job training, and educational opportunities. They also provide credible role models of success with decades of research supporting this approach as the most effective intervention.
Neighborhood public safety leaders. Neighborhood Watch and similar groups can move from an antagonistic to supportive role by referring individuals for program participation and suggesting areas of focus for outreach workers.
Evaluation. Clearly delineated evaluation criteria and procedures ensure accountability to the public and facilitate review of programmatic effectiveness by policymakers. The gold standard is regular, independent evaluation of the program by outside experts.
All right, so that brings us to sort of what are the next steps for Atlanta to make this happen that we're putting forward. We think that it's a very positive thing that a diverse group of stakeholders have come together basically to say that what's happening right now ain't working. That's a good beginning for us to start from. So we're starting from that place, and we've got this vehicle of a working group to operate. We think that's a good move in the right direction. We also know that in Atlanta, and we've had a wonderful judge who's been part of our coalition meetings in the past, who has run similar diversion programs in Atlanta before, in the 70s and the 80s, and says, I know how to run this, and we can make it work. So that works in our favor. We also feel like Atlanta's very skilled at raising private funding. So the question of how we're going to fund these services, et cetera, there are actually foundations that have helped fund in other jurisdictions. Some of them we're in contact with them, Ford Foundation, the Open Society Foundation. They're interested in Atlanta, and we know Atlanta City is very good at leveraging resources when it wants to. So, but we were saying these 4 steps, and again, when we get in small groups, we actually think there are some steps missing here that we want to put in the proposal, and so I want to hear from you all. We know that the number one thing is they need to make a commitment and appoint leadership. So everyone that we've seen in jurisdictions where they run programs like this, there needs to be passionate leadership somewhere in it helping everyone get together, so it doesn't just fiddle away and die in a bureaucratic mess, right? Because this program does take pulling together, you know, the solicitor's office, the Atlanta Police Department, the city of Atlanta, the community groups, right, the service providers. So we need leadership, and we need them to say, yes, this is the way we want to go. We've heard from the community. We're down. The second thing is we want them to go to Seattle. So Seattle has what they call the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program, which is what we really have looked at towards as a model. They have done since 2011 amazing things. They actually use their program for diversion, both of street-level sex work and low-level drug offenses. And they've seen awesome success. And what they say the most success they've seen is changing the culture of their police department. Wow. So that even ways that bleed over, not just from the cases that they're referring, but the way they treat folks, generally speaking, on the street and think about what people might need. So we have an actual offer from the Ford Foundation to fund people from the city of Atlanta and the Atlanta Police Department to fly to Seattle and see their program in motion. The city of Atlanta has not responded to that offer. They've just left money on the table. So, you know, we're going to need to do something about that, but that is there. So we're saying they need to go to Seattle and learn from the folks who are doing it. And then they need to halt the current arrest-only protocols. So our intelligence and folks in the neighborhood say they're not slowing down their sweeps. They're not slowing down this, picking up the 91% of folks that are out there really in need of other things. And so we're asking APD to stop its ineffective sweeps and operations right now that rely on arrests only and throwing people in jails and fines. And halt that while we investigate the other solutions and try to put a program like this into place. And the last step that we have there is City of Atlanta needs to start looking at who we have as service providers, many of whom have come to the meetings and testified, many of whom we could start to put together a list of for them. But any way for this to work is going to need case management and then a diverse bunch of services that do all of the range of things and all of the range of people that they might serve. So we think the City of Atlanta could right away start cataloging those and reaching out and seeing who they really have and what would they need to build. So that's the people's proposal.